A decade just ended a few months ago, so I thought it would be a good idea to make some decade lists. I'm planning to make countdowns of my top 10 favorite movies, TV shows, and video games from the decade 2010 to 2019. But that being said, I won't do them consecutively, as I have other big projects in the work. In fact, I only churned this one out now since I couldn't finish another video in time, mainly due to Corona, and I want to uphold my promise of releasing a video every month this year. That's why I went with my top 10 movies of last decade, since it doesn't require much editing, aside from audio, but that doesn't take nearly as long as editing footage together. I went with movies first since I realize I haven't covered films much on my channel, only having one countdown of recent movies, which was a top 5 anyway, so I might as well reveal more of my movie tastes. I haven't been very interested in movies since I got into TV, but that's not to say there weren't any great films. There definitely were, I just didn't see that many. Do keep in mind that I've limited the list to include one movie per franchise, but I will mention other entries if there are any. With that said, it's time to rank movies for once. Number 10. Kingsman: The Secret Service. This movie was a really fun parody on James Bond, which even got referenced within the movie itself. I have actually only seen one movie from that series, that being Spectre, so I don't really have a connection to it, but I do have a good connection to Kingsman, and while both movies are really entertaining, the original takes the cake. Eggsy is a cool main character who develops nicely throughout the movie, and his last scenes in it are pretty damn hilarious. His mentor Harry was cool too, and I dug how he was portrayed. It's a shame he had to die, but then he did return in the sequel, so I guess it's not that sad anymore. The action sequences are incredible, particularly the one in the church, which was pretty sick to witness, and the setting, along with Harry's opponents, made it incredibly comedic. Speaking of which, the ending was just awesome and comical, with all the enemies' heads exploding into fireworks, which was a visual spectacle. On the topic of enemies, it was pretty cool that Gazelle had prosthetic leg weapons, and they were put to good use in fight scenes. The main villain, Valentine, was pretty damn funny, being played by a usually serious guy like Samuel L. Jackson, and having him lisp made it funny every time he spoke. That, coupled with not handling violence well, even though he sometimes commits it, along with inviting his enemy for McDonald's, made him a really entertaining antagonist. Overall, the first Kingsman is a fun movie with wacky humor, likable characters, and awesome fighting choreography, but it doesn't grab me as much as the other movies on the list. Number 9. El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. Ah, Breaking Bad, one of the best TV shows ever, which also happens to have one of the best series finals ever. Sure, Walt's plan might have worked a bit too conveniently, but I didn't mind it since the whole thing was so well executed, and the plot threads got wrapped up so neatly. Most people were super content with how it ended, so was El Camino needed? Not really, but it was nice to see Jesse Pinkman return and have his story wrap up, and it's nowhere near as pointless as, say, Solo was. Jesse Pinkman might actually be my favorite Breaking Bad character, and he was put to really good use in El Camino, which had to be the case seeing as the movie is literally about him, and Aaron Paul's acting was brilliant as usual. It's not a particularly eventful movie, but it did have some good dialogue and intense scenes. I love the interactions with Jesse's pals, Badger and especially Skinny Pete, who did such a huge favor for his friend. The plot regarding the fake cops was really good too, and they had me fooled initially. I like that Jesse kept his moral code and didn't shoot them when he thought they were cops, and when he realized they weren't, he handled situations like a boss. Something the movie did very well was give flashbacks and callbacks to other Breaking Bad characters, most of which Jesse didn't even encounter in the story, like Walter, Mike, Todd, Jane, and even Brock. Todd did look very different, having gained some weight, but he was still very much the same despicable character. Him acting so nonchalant about his terrible actions always made him one of the scariest villains in the series. It was nice seeing Jesse come to terms with himself in the end, and I hope he lives a good life in Alaska as a new person. While I much prefer Felina as a series final, El Camino was a nice addition in its own right, but it's not among my favorite movies. Number 8. Interstellar. Not gonna lie, I had forgotten a lot about this movie since I hadn't watched it since it came out in 2014, but I did rewatch it not that long ago and it was pretty awesome, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't confused by it. Cooper affecting the past I can kinda get behind, since that was pretty mind-blowing to witness, but I don't understand how he got put into that box in the first place while he was floating in outer space. I know the movie is science fiction, but some elements of it seemed more like fiction than science, but then I'm not an expert in that field. It was still really well executed. In fact, the direction in the whole film was superb, with fantastic music composed by the brilliant Hans Zimmer, along with some absolutely beautiful shots. I cried hard when Cooper saw videos his children had sent him over the years he was wasting in a place where time moved far quicker. I'm not even too familiar with the characters at this point in the movie, but that shit hit deep. Like, just imagine if you were in that situation, watching your kids grow up in mere seconds without being there for them, and one of them resenting you on top of that. That factor made the ending emotionally satisfying, with Cooper's daughter finally understanding his father's actions, and seeing her be way older than him was quite a sight to behold. I do find it weird that the son got neglected in the end, as you'd think Cooper would care equally as much for him as his daughter, but we didn't even hear whether he's still alive or not, which he probably isn't, but Cooper could have asked. That being said, Interstellar is a really deep and ambitious movie that knows how to hit you hard with its masterclass direction, and even if it might not make complete sense, it moved me more than most movies, so it pretty much did its job. Number 7. Mission Impossible Fallout. This was my second favorite movie of 2018, and while I haven't seen it since, nor have I checked out any of its other installments, I can't deny how awesome it was. It has some really likable characters, and the main character, Ethan Hunt, reminds me so much of Nathan Drake from Uncharted, with a similar appearance, combat and parkour skills, and even closely sounding names. The action, by the way, was incredible throughout, having such intense set pieces, especially since they're accompanied by such bombastic soundtracks. It was neat how some of it was filmed in Norway, where I come from, and Preikestolen was a fitting location to use, what with its flat surface and high fall. I also appreciated the clever twists that made it so I couldn't correctly predict everything. I don't have much else to say about this movie really, as I haven't seen it since it aired in cinemas, plus I've already talked about it in my top 5 movies of 2018, so on to the next entry. Number 6. Avengers Infinity War. Another movie from 2018, but I remember a lot more about this one than Fallout. That might be because I've seen it like thrice, and I haven't even seen all the other MCU movies. I kinda just gave up on doing that, and it seems most of them aren't all that good anyway. Infinity War is fantastic though, with its ambitious cast of very likable characters that have their own unique abilities, making for some truly diverse and dynamic fights. This movie seriously has some of the most epic large-scale battles I've seen, even though there's a lot of nonsense to them, but the insane nanotechnology of Iron Man's suit is so cool that it doesn't really matter. Spider-Man got his own nanotech suit, which looks awesome, and is my preferred suit in Spider-Man PS4. My biggest issue with the movie is probably when Star-Lord ruins the plan to remove Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet, which would have worked hadn't he screwed it up. It's understandable why he did it, but it was still pretty dumb. Thanos is definitely my favorite character of the movie, and he's one of my favorite movie villains, having a deluded yet fascinating philosophy and a grand plan that he's actually able to act on, unlike most villains who are just all talk. That led to one of the most heart-wrenching moments in recent cinema, when half of the universe's population got disintegrated, including some of our most beloved heroes. Of course, that did get reversed in Endgame, which is a movie I liked, but it did mitigate a lot of what Infinity War pulled, which of course was inevitable, but it probably could have been handled better. That movie also worsened Thanos' character, which is a shame when he was so brilliant in this one. So, Infinity War is a really interesting comic book movie that breaks a lot of Marvel's tired conventions, featuring one of the more compelling villains within the genre, and some pretty bold twists. Some people have problems with what this movie did, but I myself am not all that invested in comics or superheroes, so I thought this movie was a breath of fresh air when it did something different. Number 5. Toy Story 3. I didn't put this movie so high on the list initially, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense for me to put it this high, as I did watch it nearly 10 times back in the day, and it's one of the best conclusions to a movie trilogy I've seen. It was interesting seeing Andy grown up, old enough to enter college, and having grown out of his childlike nature of playing with toys. That made for some interesting developments, especially since he actually did still care about his toys, despite not playing with them anymore. Woody was a goodie as usual, and managed to convince the other toys that Andy still cared. Buzz Lightyear had some really humorous scenes when he turned Spanish, flirting with Jessie and dancing so magnificently. Lotso was a pretty interesting villain who had been forgotten and later replaced, so his actions were understandable, but he did have to be brought down, as oppressing and manipulating other toys just ain't cool, man. The scene before the claw at the end was really sad and could have led to a dark ending, but it was nice that they got rescued, by the green dudes no less, who are still so obsessed with the claw. The ending was incredibly touching, Andy giving away his toys to someone younger, and hesitantly letting go of Woody, who's pretty much been Andy's best friend throughout life. Toy Story 3 is for sure my favorite movie in the series. 2 is great too, not to mention really nostalgic, but there's still a fair distance between it and its successor. The original is good, but it's definitely my least favorite, as I don't think it has as much going for it as the others do. I haven't seen the 4th, nor am I very interested to see it if I'm being honest, as I thought 3 was the ideal conclusion to the franchise, and I'm not a big enough fan of the series to check it out anyway. I am a fan of the 3rd movie though, enough to put it in the middle of this grandiose list. Number 4. The Hobbit 2: The Desolation of Smaug. I think most people would be confused to see this movie being placed so highly, but let me explain. My first experience with Middle-earth were the Hobbit movies, and I actually preferred them over the Lord of the Rings initially, barring the 3rd one, as that one wasn't very good. I don't think that anymore, and I much prefer the Lotter trilogy now, but I still really enjoy the first 2 Hobbit movies, especially the sequel. I gotta say, Bilbo Baggins is still my favorite character in the whole series, as he's just so darn lovable in The Hobbit, despite acting brash sometimes, but that just adds to his character. He's played brilliantly by Martin Freeman, who absolutely sells his stubborn and comedic nature, and I couldn't imagine a better casting. To be fair, I haven't read The Hobbit, but Martin's portrayal made him my favorite character, so he's worthy in my book. I understand the movie did take a lot of creative liberties, like Tamriel in this movie, as well as Azog, who's supposed to be long dead I believe, but I personally didn't mind their inclusion. Sure, it's kinda silly there's a love triangle between Legolas, Killy, and this movie original character Tamriel, but unlike most love triangles, I didn't really mind this one. Also, she's pretty, which doesn't have any say at all. I just wanted a contrived transition into how beautiful this movie looks. It might be due to an overabundance of CGI, but it's still beautiful, and kinda fits with the whole fantasy theme. I've rewatched this movie plenty of times, and loved it every time despite it having some glaring issues. Even though it might have been contrived not to have the movie end with Smaug's death, it was a cool cliffhanger, and the scenes prior to that were incredible, having Bilbo negotiate with a beautifully realized Smaug, Thorin slowly descending into madness, and the dwarfs attacking the dragon at their home field, which is a really cool looking environment. The Hobbit movies may not be the best, but I myself really loved the first 2, especially The Desolation of Smaug, which features some of my most memorable moments from Middle-earth. Number 3. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. The top 3 is really where it's at, with movies I absolutely adore, the first of which being a Star Wars movie, but not a main one. Why not a main one? Well, I did love The Force Awakens when I saw it initially, and rewatched it twice in cinemas, but over time I've noticed a lot of glaring issues that just cannot go ignored, and it's just gotten worse as the rest of the trilogy has screwed things over. Anyways, I'm here to talk about Rogue One, which is by far the best content Star Wars has had in recent years. Some might say The Mandalorian takes that crown, but I don't like it that much, and I fear it might be ruined in the future. Rogue One was luckily a one-off, and while one could say it wasn't necessary, like Solo, I love that it exists, and it addressed a plot hole in the original that it rectified. This movie portrays the efforts of the rebels so well, them having to struggle and even sacrifice their lives for the Death Star to eventually meet its end, meaning it wasn't in vain either. It's a really hopeful movie in that regard, even with such a dark ending, but it was a really cool ending because while it may have been predictable, it definitely proved their dedication and sold the movie's hopeful message. Many don't care much for the movie because of the characters, as we do only get to know them for one movie, but I thought they worked well enough. It's not like they're among my favorite Star Wars characters, but for only having appeared in a single movie, and a spin-off no less, some of them made a pretty good impression. Jyn Erso is a good female lead, who develops over the course of the story, especially after realizing Mads Mikkelsen is not so bad a dad after all. Kirut Imwe wasn't particularly deep or anything, but he was really funny, philosophical, and badass despite being blind, which is a character archetype I'm quite fond of. My favorite character had to be K2SO, who is a goddamn droid, and yet, he made me both laugh and cry the hardest. Krennic was also pretty interesting, being a villain who got unfairly treated by his own colleagues, which also gave Tarkin more merit. It was cool seeing and hearing Darth Vader again, and his role didn't seem ham-fisted, even though he told that pun to Krennic, which I felt was in line with his humor from Empire. His scene at the end was magnificent, and the scariest Vader has been on the big screen. In fact, the entirety of the third act was astounding, with amazing warfare both on land and in space, and the force field around Scarif made for some high tension. That was a really good looking planet, and watching it get blown up by the Death Star was breathtaking. Also, that beam hitting precisely where Krennic was on the tower was the ultimate fuck you from Tarkin, which I gotta love. Also, I absolutely adore how the movie ends just when we see Leia get the plans, and honestly, I found the motion capture both on her and Tarkin pretty good. My only real issue with the movie is the scene with Bor Gullet, as that was just gross and unnecessary, with some jarring CGI, but it's such a minor scene that it barely affects the movie on the whole. It's a stellar film, and while it's a spin-off one could argue wasn't needed, I feel like it was needed in this age of downgraded Star Wars content. Number 2. Kung Fu Panda 2. Kung Fu Panda, by far my favorite animated movie franchise, and its sequel hit all the right notes. It's my favorite in the series, being at least slightly better than the original, and clearly better than the third, but I wouldn't call the third bad, and it probably would have been number 4 on this list if I allowed multiple entries. So, what makes the second movie so good? It has a very good story about Po having to come to terms with his past, and the fact that he's adopted, which he only now realized. Yeah, the movie does have serious comedic bits, but I dig them, and those moments are well balanced with the serious dramatic elements. It's kind of necessary when the main character is voiced by Jack Black, and Po is basically him personified, which is awesome, since Jack Black is one of my favorite celebrities. Po is so damn likable because of it, and delivers some charming humor. That being said, he's not just a comedic relief, and his development, especially in the sequel, is amazing. He has to search within himself in some beautiful scenes, being visually impressive, accompanied by another of Hans Zimmer's fantastic scores. Tigress is another great character that deserves a shout out, as she had a great supporting role, literally, as she was supporting Po through tough times, and that made their relationship so wholesome, especially since Tigress couldn't stand him in the first movie. Same can be said for Master Shifu, although it's a bit of a shame that his role is so minor, but he's still quite integral to Po's development regarding inner peace. Shen is definitely the most interesting villain in the series, being heavily tied to Po's past and future in that he basically committed genocide on the pandas, and he does whatever he can to alter his destiny of getting beaten by the yin and yang symbol. That symbol is expertly used plenty of times throughout the movie, and it fits so well for a panda, being black and white. I love the last fight where Po treats the cannonballs like droplets he can juggle and throw back at enemies, and the last time he does it, he forms the yin and yang symbol and shouts, "Skidoosh!" which is so fucking badass, even though it's very cartoony, but it just works. Speaking of battles, Kung Fu Panda is known to have incredible fighting choreography, and this movie displays it well, both in terms of large-scale battles and one-on-ones. Kung Fu Panda 2 is truly an incredible, underrated movie, not to mention sequel, especially when it comes to animation, and while Toy Story is great, I think Kung Fu Panda has it beat. Number 1. Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension. Kung Fu Panda 2 might be the best animated movie ever made, but it's just barely not my favorite. That honor goes to Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension. I am a major fan of Phineas and Ferb. That show was practically most of my cartoon childhood around 2010, and I still loved it when I went through it all 3 years ago. This movie is everything I love about the series, but cranked up to 11, and yes, it is fan-servicey, but I am a fan, so I want to be serviced. This movie is honestly much better than my favorite episode of the show, which is probably Summer Belongs to You. Not that it's bad, I still love it a ton, but I love the movie quite a bit more. But why is that? Something we rarely see in the show is Perry's identity getting revealed to someone, and it usually only happens in dreams. It's obvious that his identity never gets revealed to the brothers, since the show would probably end at that point, but I love that it was showcased in the movie, and it was handled so well. It made for one of the most interesting conflicts yet, with Phineas feeling betrayed by Perry, and Perry trying to earn his trust back. Perry the Platypus is my second favorite character of the show, but he's by far the best in this movie, and to think that a mere pet character could draw me in so much. He's funny, cheeky, awesome, and truly cares for the brothers, even when they're in doubt, and their relationship is too wholesome. I mean, just look at how the movie opens, with a song called Everything's Better with Perry, which is my favorite song of the movie, as it encapsulates the brothers' relationship with them, plus it sounds pleasant, and I love Ferb's unusually high-pitched vocals. Musical numbers are some of Phineas and Ferb's greatest attributes, and this movie has no shortage of them, not to mention they're all so good. I Walk Away is short, but always gets me teary-eyed. The summer song is super uplifting and basically summarizes what the show is all about, and a brand new reality made for a catchy montage. There's even a cut song called Some Mysterious Force, which is the only Candace song and is pretty self-aware and funny. Alt Balsheet's little song was funny too, but it does need a chorus. The funniest song, however, has to be the Doof Duet, and this is a good transition to the second dimension aspect of the movie, which I absolutely adore. It was awesome seeing the characters' alternate forms, Doofenshmirtz, Candace, and Buford in particular being really entertaining. Doofenshmirtz is my favorite character in the series, but he kinda got outshone by his contemporary in this movie, which is fine since double the doof means double the fun. When it comes to the climax of the movie, it kind of seems like a precursor to the climax of Avengers Endgame, but instead of the superheroes returning for the final battle, Phineas and Ferb's impressive creations got recreated for the final battle. Both moments are ridiculously epic, but I personally get more satisfaction from this movie since I care a lot more about Phineas and Ferb, and that moment never fails to send chills through my body. The song Robot Riot by Love Handle makes for a legendary battle track, and I love how it all culminated with the joke that everything returns back to normal when Candace tries showing her parents. Now that was a brilliant use of the mysterious force. I'd say one of my only flaws with the movie is that Ferb didn't get much spotlight, making him seem less significant than Phineas, especially concerning the drama with Perry, and there was some unnecessary comedy during serious bits, but otherwise it's pretty much a perfect movie to me. I think the biggest problem for most people is that everyone has their memories wiped in the end, but it was kind of necessary, and made for an extremely sweet ending. Perry needing to move away from the family would have added more consequence, but I prefer the way it was handled. And to quote Ferb, we've had a lot of great days, but we only have one Perry. The movie isn't even done after that, as we see Perry looking at the pictures him and the brothers took during the whole event, with a really nice buddy song in the background. Even the credits kicked it up a notch with a banger song, featuring Slash of all people, so you can tell that this movie is filled to the brim with passion. While I'm looking forward to the next Phineas and Ferb movie, I highly doubt it can live up to Across the Second Dimension. But it doesn't have to, as I'm content with this awesome show having one awesome movie, and had this been the series final, it would have been the perfect send-off. So, that was the list of my top 10 favorite movies from the last decade, and I really like all of them, especially the top 3, and even more so the top 2, that are some of my favorite movies, and are my 2 favorite animated movies. Here's to hoping this decade will be great for films, and maybe I'll watch more than I did last decade, where I was kinda slacking. I've already seen more new movies this year than I usually watch in a whole year, so there just might be hope for that. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully, you'll see me next time!